Proceedings are resumed. Please be seated. Continuing with questions.
The elected member for Bontown West to ask the Honorable Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs, question number 19.
The member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to question number 19 standing in my name, can the Honorable Minister say what has been done by the government to ensure that cable TV operators are meeting the public broadcast license requirement of providing local content free to air? Thank you.
The Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The answer? According to information provided by the Utility Regulation and Competition Office, there are currently 4 Type 7 subscription television broadcasting licensees. These include Digicel, Infinity Broadcasting, operating as C3, Cable and Wireless, operating as Flow, and Westel, operating as Logic. Such a service is where the licensee provides a package of television channels to a customer who typically has to pay the licensee a monthly subscription. Mr. Speaker, as the question by the member infers, at the time those aforementioned licenses were issued, as a condition for obtaining a subscription TV license, all licensees had to also apply for and operate a Type 6 public service television broadcasting license. In other words, it was a requirement to have a broadcast free-to-air TV channel in order to obtain a cable TV license. Each named licensee was licensed to provide each of those services at different times. C3 in December 2004, Digicel in April 2012, Flow in November 2012, and Westel in February 2012. In addition to providing the local television service, pardon me, all those named licensees have an obligation in Annex 1 of their respective licenses, which sets out how the local television part of the service is defined. Namely that any customer wishing to receive the public television service shall be provided such a service either via cable or broadcast over the air within a reasonable time frame and at no cost to the customer. Program content shall, at a minimum, be 20% local content, which shall include such items as local talk shows, educational, cultural, and religious programming, live sporting events, government information services, and live coverage of the proceedings of the legislature. Public television service shall involve programming offered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Mr. Speaker, the above definition is broad and was first drafted nearly 14 years ago in late 2004 for insertion into C3's license. That obligation was then reflected in the other licenses issued in 2012. The Utilities Regulation and Competition Office, or OFREG, has identified 3 particular issues of concern. The first issue is the size of the free-to-air market. OFREG currently relies on consumer feedback by way of complaints, as well as random scanning of free-to-air channels to confirm whether licensees are meeting their obligations. Feedback from consumer complaints, or more precisely, the lack thereof, seems to suggest that the local content expectation via free-to-air TV broadcasting is currently being met. But this lack of complaints is potentially misleading. At the moment, while the OFREG does not receive many complaints about this issue, perhaps one complaint over the past year, it is believed that this is due in part to most consumers using other technologies to watch TV, such as internet streaming, cable TV, and other methods. OFREG believes, therefore, that the number of consumers who have no other means at their disposal other than a free-to-air TV is quite small. The second issue is the spirit versus the letter of the license obligation. Notwithstanding the above, OFREG is aware of various technical and commercial issues that have resulted in some delays in providing free-to-air content. Basically, it is very complex and expensive to set up and operate a traditional TV station, especially in such a small market. However, with modern technology, it is possible to create local content without the overheads associated with a traditional TV station. Indeed, there are currently several sources of local video content which cable TV licensees carry on various channels, thereby arguably meeting the spirit of the license obligation. Mr. Speaker, the third issue is obsolete technology. Although local TV broadcasting began in the early 1990s, it wasn't until the ICTA was formed in the early 2000s that the current licensing framework came into being. Under this licensing framework, the first TV station license was granted 15 years ago. Since then, the world of TV broadcasting has changed dramatically. Across the world, countries are moving away from old analog UHF TV broadcasting techniques and towards a new digital TV or DTV standards. Most industrialized nations have already migrated their TV stations to the new DTV format. In fact, in the not too distant future, consumers will have difficulty finding a TV manufacturer who still makes a TV capable of receiving UHF channels. The reasons for this global shift from analog to digital technology are many, including reducing radio interference, more efficient use of the radio spectrum, more features and capabilities under the DTV standards, and perhaps most importantly, the move allows the old UHF radio spectrum to be used for other purposes, such as wireless mobile networks. Mr. Speaker, given the facts associated with these three issues set out above, OFREG has taken the position that it is unwise, if not futile, to pursue a course of enforcement on this issue. Instead, the country could be better served by embracing newer technologies and leveraging the benefits of lower cost, more robust, and capable broadcasting standards such as DTV. Furthermore, greater effort should be made to encourage the increased production of local content. Therefore, OFREG is currently examining these license obligations with a view to modernizing and streamlining the various obligations. This is part of a larger effort to redesign the licensing and regulatory frameworks, which are now over a decade old, with the view of moving away from a micromanagement approach to licensing and towards a principle-based, outcomes-oriented regulatory framework. In 2014, the then ICTA conducted a consultation on the future of local TV. Generally, the responses were in support of a local content obligation. However, there was no clear position or appreciation of the difference between obligations to provide local TV service via free-to-air versus obligations to provide local content. That said, the general consensus seemed to be that if, at the very least, access to current free-to-air local content remained, the community would be well served. In considering the consultation responses and the current industry trends, OFREG has sought to modernize the licensing regime. As such, OFREG is embarking on a comprehensive review of the telecommunications market, which is underway at the moment.
The member for Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Honorable Premier for his response. My follow-up question, Mr. Speaker, is that going by the spirit of what the regulations or meant was that locals would at least get something free. And if we were promised something free, whether it wants to come via over the air or internet or something, the bottom line is these providers owe us something free and they owe us something local. Now, the main question, Mr. Speaker, which is the genesis of this question, is World Cup football is coming up. World Cup football is coming up, and right now, from what I understand, the company that has the rights to local to World Cup football, which in many countries is something that is given away for free, basically has no free content in which to provide. So I would like to know, and I understand that some of the other local providers can't offer this service because of different commercial rights. So something that was supposed to be free, in essence, is not going to be free for many people. So the question is then, through you, Mr. Speaker, is what does OFREG intend to do to ensure that our people can get our free World Cup football and local content? Well, I want football too. Free local World Cup football and also the local content. Because the bottom line is, we need it. It's coming up this summer. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful, and I think it should not be lost on other members of this honorable House that honesty is the best policy, and that the member from Bordentown West willingly confessed the true motivation for the question, which is the imperative of being able to watch the World Cup starting in June. But, Mr. Speaker, that notwithstanding, and that's a very important imperative, I agree with him, but that is not local content, as much as we would like. The Cayman Islands national football team didn't make it to the World Cup this time. But, Mr. Speaker, the OFREG is currently reviewing the license of one of the entities, Flow in particular, and the objective is to move everybody's obligation to the DTV standard, which will make it much easier to provide local content and free to something. I'm not sure what that would be. Because one of the great challenges and why they haven't complied for all these years is the cost of providing the local content is just astronomical in the grand scheme of things. So it's still very much in the early stages, but what OFREG is working on is moving everybody to the modern DTV platform. And from there, it should be much easier to provide both local content and free broadcasting, as was envisaged some 14 years ago. I don't know that that means we're going to get World Cup football free to air, but we do the best we can.
Member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you, sir, and again, thank the Premier for the response and I guess the indirect support. FIFA, by virtue of the license and the way World Cup football is licensed, is that there are still a number of games that for each country that carries it is supposed to be free. So the question I would like to have then is that if the OFREG will be insisting that whoever has the commercial rights for FIFA to carry FIFA World Cup locally, give the games that are supposed to be free, or find a way to make them free to the public. It could be via the internet or something where people can watch on their phone, but it comes with a certain amount of games that should be free.
Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, thank you and the House for the indulgence. This is a little bit outside my usual area of expertise, so I need a little more briefing than usual. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, the answer is that technically OFREG could insist that whoever has the contract as part of their obligation, which is not being met otherwise, of providing a certain amount of free to air content, that they could. The problem is that it would be nigh on impossible for the provider to do so because they don't have in place, any of these entities, the mechanisms to provide, in other words, a channel, a free-to-air channel, to be able to do so. Because all of their thing is broadcast by virtue of cable. So unless you were to insist, perhaps somewhat unreasonably, given that you're only dealing with one as opposed to all of them, that they now go to the expense and trouble of putting in place a free-to-air channel specifically for the World Cup. It's not possible otherwise.
The member for Bontown West.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you, and again I thank the Premier. May I make a suggestion then, since other residents already have local TV providers is that whoever has the rights, free up some of those rights to the other carriers so at least they can provide it free of cost, because it would have already been included in whatever monthly subscription someone is already paying. Anyway, I think that's one way, but to try and hold on to something that should be free and everyone else around the world is getting it free and we have to pay for it because the rules have not been enforced. Give the other providers the permission then to take some of the games, and whoever their customers are, they can watch some of the games. I think that's a fair enough compromise, considering that in the last so many years they've gotten away with it. I think asking for this once every 4 years wouldn't be too much to ask for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I think the best and the wisest thing I can do at this stage is to say that OFREG is now aware of this particular concern. They're very sensitive to the need for the member from Bordentown West to have access to all of the World Cup games. And they're going to look at the situation and see if there is a viable means of achieving what the member is seeking.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister could comment on at what point in time will the constituents of Northside be able to get some kind of reasonable TV? It is kind of disturbing when you're watching cricket and 15 wickets fall for the day and you didn't manage to see either one fall because the TV was jumping all over the place. And we're paying $100 and odd a month for the service. The quality is just unbelievable, terrible, and nobody seems to be able to enforce anything on these people to produce the quality that we're paying for. But I had flow and I made a mistake now going back to West Star, and that's worse. When they got the license, they committed to roll out to these eastern districts and dismiss it.
Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, this is technical stuff with which I am not entirely comfortable. So I shall read. Although all the competitive telecom providers agreed to license conditions which committed them to deploy fiber across the island, all have since failed to meet this obligation. OFREG has pointed this out to each and every licensee and has announced it publicly in a public consultation document on broadband, which was published just last week. The objective of this consultation is to properly define the term broadband, as has been done in other advanced countries, and then to set a new target for all licensees to make broadband available to all citizens by a certain date. OFREG will then employ a universal service fund to construct a separate fiber optic network serving the eastern districts. And, Mr. Speaker, make the telecoms pay for it. Licensees will then have no excuse to meet the new broadband delivery target. So in other words, all these years we keep struggling unsuccessfully to get them to deploy the fiber that they've agreed to. So we're going to abandon that approach. We're going to build a fiber network, and we're going to charge the licensees for it.
To you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. And can the minister say who's going to pay for this new fiber band network? Hopefully not the constituents of the eastern districts. Because we paying more now and getting nothing. But the question is, we have a regulatory authority. Somebody signed a license knowing what the requirements of that license was. They have not complied with the license. Why are they being allowed to operate?
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, because some TV is better than no TV. So I don't think that the Leader of Opposition's constituents would be any happier than mine if the approach taken resulted in them having no TV at all. Hence the approach that we've talked about.
Leader of the Opposition.
Can the minister confirm that at least one of these operators has conveniently seen fit to install fiber from Frank Sound to Health City? And why aren't my constituents getting the same benefit of enforcement? Because they should have to put it outside too, not just where they want to be commercial, where they can make money. Yeah, I must be. It's not that they can't do it, it's just that they won't do it because of the expense.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Leader of the Opposition just gave another example of why it is necessary to adopt the approach that I just outlined, that the OFREG will build the fiber network, because the market has failed. And short of really radical steps which could result in no TV at all, if we shut down the operators, we have to find another mechanism. So the response of OFREG is to build out the fiber network and make the licensees pay for it. Then there will be no excuse as to why they haven't put in the fiber.
The Leader of the Opposition.
I don't think he will.
18 months is the current estimate. From now.
The member for Bordentown West.
Thanks, Mr.
Last supplementary.
From me, right?
From you.
Okay, that's what I did make sure. Just for clarity, Mr. Speaker, I know the OFREG had insisted, even when the different telephone companies, mobile companies started, in terms of co-location. The reality of it is that we do have fiber around the island, and it's just a matter then of putting pressure on some of the companies that have dark fiber, basically excess fiber that's sitting there, as opposed to rebuilding a new one. Because, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that anyone believes that the providers are going to pay for it and not pass the cost on to the consumer. So we may run the risk of paying twice. So the question in this, Mr. Speaker, is what pressure can the OFREG put to bear on the two existing companies that already have fiber around the island in terms of a green bandwidth or given what needs to be given? Because you do just have some selfish players in the market. And just like we force some companies to co-locate on the cell sites, I think we should be looking to do the same where this fiber is concerned. Thanks.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current arrangements which force or attempted to force the licensees to build their own fiber network, very expensive. Doing it the way that is being proposed, I am advised, is would be a fraction of that cost. So if we continue down the road, the present contractual arrangement, the cost of the TV would be expected to increase significantly. If OFREC does it and makes arrangement that the licensees pay it back over time, it is expected that that will result in a lower cost than the present arrangement, had the present arrangement actually been followed through by the licensees, i.e. they had built the fiber network.
I allow two more supplementaries, Georgetown Central.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is relating to mobile devices and accessibility to what would be considered explicit or rated R or not safe for kids under the age of 18 and the accessibility to it. The question is, can OFREG say, or can the minister say, if there's any indications of putting in the necessary protections that children who we know every day has a device in their hand have accessibility to some information, videos, and the like that are not safe for our children? Are we putting in any protections that they don't have access to that kind of material? I would say, just for adding to the discussion, that the UK has such a principle whereby you can't access certain types of information or videos or data without proving that you are of the age of 18. I think this is something that we should pay much attention to, and I hope that OFREC can say it's something that's on their agenda.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, my advice is that there is no country in the world, in the Western world, which is not struggling with this issue of balancing people's right to access content with the obvious challenge and risks that are inherent with that. There are places like China and Saudi Arabia and others where they've put in these firewalls and you just can't get access to the information. But probably the most effective censorship program there is called parenting. We don't know how else you can keep a kid from having access to, who has access to a smartphone, from accessing this information. That's not me saying that, that's the expert saying that.
Mr. Speaker, I beg your
You
indulgence
have
to
a
allow
follow-up?
one. Thank you, sir.
I said the last one, so make this one the last one. Make it
Thank
one.
you so much, Mr. Speaker. Based on the information and research that I've collected, Mr. Speaker, I dare say that that is incorrect based on the experts. I just got back from the UK and I did the test myself. Today, you can take a mobile phone, use the data, go to any explicit website of pornography, and I didn't want to bring this up, but I unfortunately have to make sure the clarity of what I'm trying to say. And you can get a website without any proof of any sort of your age. You go to the UK, you use the same mobile network, you put in an explicit website, you have to prove that you are of the age of 18 with identification. If the UK can do it, the Cayman Islands can do it. So unless the expert is saying it cannot be done in the Cayman Islands, I think that, which they have already said, what I'm saying is they
Turn it
need
into
to...
a question, please.
I don't even know how to question when they're saying they can't do it and it can be done. If it can be, they're saying that there's no ultimate way it can be done in the Cayman Islands while other countries are doing it.
Mr. Speaker, I can't add it. I'm no expert at this. I suspect since the member from Georgetown Central seems to be, that he should connect with the director of OFREG, who's right here, and perhaps he can provide them with the expertise that they can get this done.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your indulgence, sir, I'll just chime in quickly on this last topic, but it will be very brief. No. I think you may like what I have to say. I wouldn't support respectfully what the member from Central is suggesting, because that would require a level of deep, what you call deep packet inspection, which means that the regulatory body is going to be watching everything you do. I don't subscribe to that. I'd prefer that we go the route, as the Premier suggested, of parental control and install an app on your child's phone that can't do that. No, I have a question. I do have a question, though, but I'm agreeing, let's not go down that road, because I don't want anyone spying on my phone transmissions. My question is, I don't think any of us would want anyone prying into our private communications. But my question is, I'm trying to remember my question now because I'm getting distracted, has OFREG received any complaints about certain providers who have now installed fiber networks, restricting the rollout of that service to only affluent areas in the country and not doing it across the board, regardless of demographic?
Premier?
The answer, Mr. Speaker, is yes. There are lots of complaints about it, and the OFREG itself and the director is very, very concerned about it. The concentration has been the West Bay Road, Georgetown, and certain parts of the Bordentown district. Very little beyond that. And to anticipate the follow-up question, which may not be allowed, the answer of OFREG to that is what I've explained before: redefining broadband and building the fiber network themselves.
Mr. Speaker, I will offer some clarity on what I'm suggesting. As members of opposition and government, we have classified information that we pass between ourselves, and we wouldn't want anyone prying into those communications. Nothing to do with any sort of entertainment indulgence.
Some of you are very good at that entertainment, I note. Next question.
The elected member for Georgetown West to ask the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor. Question number 20.
Member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to question number 20, standing in my name, can the Honourable Minister provide the number of times and dates the National Security Council met since September 2013, and of those meetings, how many were at the request of the Premier, as per Section 58(9) of the Cayman Islands Constitution? Thank you.
Honorable Premier.
No, Mr. Speaker. If I were in charge of the NSC, I wouldn't have made that long complaint I did. This is a matter for the governor and by delegation, the deputy governor.
The Honorable, the Acting Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Premier has just referenced, and for clarity, the question was originally directed to the Honourable Member and Premier, the Honourable Premier and Minister for Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. However, given that under the Cayman Islands Constitution, the National Security Council is chaired by Her Excellency the Governor, I, as Acting Deputy Governor, shall provide the response. Mr. Speaker, since September 2013, the National Security Council met for a total of 8 times on the following dates: 20th of September 2013, 4th of July 2014, 18th of November 2014, 8th of January 2015, 16th of November 2015, 17th of February 2016, 10th of January 2017, and 31st of October 2017. As a matter of practice, meetings of the NSC have been called in consultation with the Honorable Premier. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it would be accurate to say that the Premier has provided direct input on all of the meeting dates of the National Security Council since September 2013. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of questions.
Statements by the Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those of us who have the privilege to serve in this honorable House know the work we do here impacts not only Cayman today, but the generations of Caymanians to come. And for some of us, if we are fortunate enough, the decisions we make here will create important national symbols or institutions that last for generations and help define our islands. So I'm certain all of us in this House will agree with me that it is important that we pause to look back and reflect on where we have come from and celebrate key moments in our history, in particular, historic moments that represent the work done by past legislators. Our islands have 2 such significant opportunities in the next 2 years to celebrate our wonderful and colorful history: the 60-year diamond anniversaries of our coat of arms on the 14th of May this year, and our first Constitution on Constitution Day 1st July 2019. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to advise this House that under my direction, a small project team has been assembled to organize the events that will celebrate and commemorate these historic anniversaries. Celebrations are expected to begin in May this year, both here at home and in the United Kingdom. Historically speaking, Mr. Speaker, the proposal for a coat of arms was approved by the Cayman Islands Legislative Assembly in 1957, and public input was sought on its design. The royal warrant assigning what were called armorial ensigns for the Cayman Islands was approved by Her Majesty's Command on the 14th of May, 1958. Unfortunately, our original document displaying our coat of arms was lost in the fire that destroyed the old government administration building in the early 1970s. And so the Cayman Islands London office is arranging for 2 facsimiles of the original coat of arms document to be produced. One will be displayed in the London office and the other here in Cayman. Almost a year to the day of the assigning of our coat of arms, the House of Commons in the United Kingdom approved our first constitution on the 13th of May, 1959, and it was adopted by the Cayman Islands on the 4th of July that year. Mr. Speaker, since that date, the document that governs us has gone through a number of revisions, with the latest coming in 2009, following the country's first referendum, when the voters of these islands agreed it was time to modernize our constitution. Mr. Speaker, our first constitution was extremely important for several reasons. Firstly, we ceased to be a dependency of Jamaica and became a crown colony in our own right. It also recognized full suffrage, allowing women the right to vote and stand for election for the first time. The Constitution also allowed the Cayman Islands the ability to make and pass our own laws, and thus helped to usher in many of the early laws on which we built our tourism and financial services industries. So in many ways, the 1959 Constitution was the foundation on which the modern Cayman Islands has been built. Indeed, our Constitution was also the first step toward political advancement for these islands, as we became exempt from the control of the Jamaican legislature. The arrival of our first constitution had the effect of returning some degree of independence to our legislators, linking us back 128 years to the formation of our first legislative body, the Assembly of Justices and Vestry, in 1831 at Pedro St. James. Under the 1959 Constitution, the Assembly of Justices and Vestry was replaced with the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind this House and the public of the members who comprised that first Legislative Assembly in 1959. The Administrator of the Cayman Islands, Major A.H. Donald, served as the President, with the official members comprising the Honorable James Astwood, the Honorable Ernest Panton, and Mr. Desmond Watler, both of whom I had the honor of knowing. There were also members nominated by the Administrator, namely Mr. M.S. Forbes, Captain Theophilus Borden, and William Warren Connolly, one of our national heroes. The elected members, Mr. Speaker, were for West Bay, Arthur H. Ebanks, James Cadian Ebanks, and T. William Farrington, known as Mr. Willie Farrington. For Georgetown, Dr. Roy McTaggart, E. Duncan Merrin, and A. Colin Panton. For Bordentown, Malcolm Eden and Arlie James Miller. For East End, William Allen McLaughlin, who was my grandfather. Northside, Mr. Craddock Ebanks, and for the sister islands, Nolan B. Foster and Keith P. Tibbetts. Mr. Speaker, it was these legislators who were soon grappling with the difficult conversations about the future that these islands would take, including joining the West Indies Federation, remaining part of Jamaica, or maintaining a constitutional relationship with the United Kingdom. Their decisions in those early days set us down the path to today. Mr. Speaker, I believe that you were quoted in a newspaper in 2009 on the 50th anniversary of the Constitution saying, "We should be proud of our rich history, especially our constitutional heritage, because it underscores the importance we place on the rule of law and self-determination as an overseas territory of the United Kingdom." Unquote. Mr. Speaker, in 2009, we were unable to have the celebration that such an anniversary of the Constitution deserved. But we now have an opportunity with the 60th anniversary of the Constitution and of the coat of arms to not only celebrate our history, but to educate our young people and remind us older ones of the importance of our coat of arms and our first Constitution. To mark these anniversaries, Mr. Speaker, the government is planning a 2-year program of activities focused on engaging, educating, and inspiring our Caymanian youth, celebrating our diversity, celebrating the Cayman Islands' colorful history, and engendering national pride. Mr. Speaker, the coat of arms, as I said previously, was officially assigned by the House of Commons in the United Kingdom on the 14th of May, 1958. And so it is fitting that the year-long celebration begins on that anniversary, Monday, 14th of May this year, in London. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands government will be hosting a reception at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London, where we will celebrate the 60-year anniversary of the Cayman Islands coat of arms. Secretary of State for the Foreign and Commonwealth, let me try again, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom government Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and Garda King of Arms Thomas Woodcock will speak at the reception. Plans are to promote our links with the United Kingdom, as well as tell the fantastic success story of the Cayman Islands. On the 15th of May, Michelin star British chef Claire Smythe will host a private Cayman bespoke lunch in London and share her experiences of the Cayman Islands. Some of you will remember that she was in Grand Cayman for 10 days in March last year to encounter Cayman's fresh produce, meats, and seafood, which she used to produce pop-up culinary events. Our London office is also working with the Maritime Authority to take our anniversary celebrations to the Monaco Boat Show later this year in September. It is only fitting that we are there to share in our commemorations because the Cayman Islands flag, the red ensign, dominates 70% of the super yachts of the world. Mr. Speaker, we will also have a presence at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham at the end of September, 1st of October, hosting events and a lecture in the context of a global Britain, including the Cayman Islands' role. Our own local celebrations will begin with the 28th of May launch. I have promised the local project organizing team not to steal their thunder about the plans underway, so I will leave it to them to announce the Cayman activities and events. Throughout the celebrations of our diamond anniversary of our coat of arms and the first Constitution, we will undertake a program of celebration and education about the Cayman Islands and our links to the United Kingdom. This includes the creation of an education pack on the history of the Cayman Islands that can be used in our schools in Cayman, and perhaps also in schools in the United Kingdom, an ebook about the Cayman Islands, as well as a book on the Cayman-UK connection being produced by the Cayman Islands London office in partnership with the West India Committee. Here at home, Mr. Speaker, a book commissioned by you is being penned by former Speaker, the Honorable Mary Lawrence, to record for posterity the history of the Legislative Assembly from its beginnings on the 5th of December, 1831, at Pedro St. James up until today. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to sharing with you more about our celebrations once they are all confirmed. I am certain the members of this House will join me, some of the members of this House will join me in these events. And Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to both you and the Leader of the Opposition, who have already indicated your willingness to be part of the Cayman Islands government's delegation to London in May. I invite, Mr. Speaker, other members who wish to be part of that celebration to give us the necessary indications so the arrangements can be made. But Mr. Speaker, I am already filled with a great deal of pride at what I see as being a wonderful set of opportunities for us to impart to the generations to come in these islands and to some of the older people who may not recognize and acknowledge the significance of those events 60 years or nigh on 60 years ago. It really was, Mr. Speaker, those 5 years between 1957 and 1962 that set in place the platform, the foundation for what is modern-day Cayman. For all of the years that preceded that, of our settlement, which preceded that, have not come close to the development of these islands in the last 60 years. So starting with conferring on women the right to vote and stand for public office, the receipt of our coat of arms in 1958, our first constitution in 59, and our separation from the Jamaica following their independence in 1962, and us becoming a crown colony in our own right. All of that occurred over that crucial 5-year period, and it is on that and from that point that these islands have really taken off and developed to the place that we know now, which is the envy not just of the region, but of most of the world. And so I think we have a wonderful opportunity to celebrate from whence we have come and what we have become, and to tell more people around the world about it, and in particular to remind the United Kingdom of the link we have with them, and to help forge for ourselves a greater and more prominent place in the widely touted new global Britain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Premier. You want to have one speak? You got the next one? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have one more statement. Mr. Speaker, in February, I announced at the Cayman Alternative Investment Summit that I had been invited by the United Kingdom government to lead a team from Cayman to attend the great Festival of Innovation that will take place in Hong Kong next week from 21st to 24th of March. Excitingly, Cayman is being included for the very first time in the official UK delegation as part of the Global Britain Initiative. I said at the time that the Financial Services Ministry, the Tourism Ministry, and the Health Ministry would reach out to industry leaders to determine the level of interest in businesses also attending and showcasing Cayman's world-class innovative products and services. This will be the first time that an overseas territory has been invited to participate in such an event by the United Kingdom government, and provides us with an opportunity to not only continue to strengthen our relationship with the United Kingdom, but to also strengthen our business ties in Hong Kong. The Asian market has become increasingly more important to our financial services business, and with the advent of financial technology, or fintech, there is a vast opportunity that we will be able to grow that business from this region. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we have had 2 large business delegations from China and Hong Kong visit Cayman over the past 12 months. In addition, in February of last year, I and members of government met with the Chinese ambassador to the United Kingdom, Mr. Lu Xiaoming, to discuss deepening the relationship between China and the overseas territories. He also hosted a lunch for the Cayman delegation along with Chinese business leaders. This was in London, Mr. Speaker. At this time, he told us that the separation of the United Kingdom from the European Union, that with the separation of the United Kingdom from the European Union on the horizon, it was a good time for China to work with the UK and by extension the Cayman Islands to expand their mutual business interests. He also said that he would encourage China's business leaders to look to the Cayman Islands for opportunities to expand business cooperation. So, Mr. Speaker, keeping our fingers on the pulse of the Asian market is important, especially as we continue to do battle with the EU on the validity of the Cayman business model. And so we view this invitation by the United Kingdom to attend the Festival of Innovation in Hong Kong and to participate alongside the UK in several of the main events as not only an honor, but as an important initiative to strengthen ties. The festival also gives us an opportunity to support the Caymanian financial services firms in Hong Kong, as well as highlight Cayman's strengths in financial services, luxury tourism, and innovations in health and Cayman's healthcare industry. Mr. Speaker, joining the government delegation will be representatives from the private sector, including Cayman Finance and the Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Devi Shetty from Health City, Cayman Islands, will also attend and speak on health, as well as serve as a panelist in a session entitled Living Longer, Living Better. The Honourable Minister of Health will attend to champion innovations in healthcare. The Honourable Minister for Financial Services will take part in a panel discussion on financial technology futures, while the Honourable Minister for Commerce will attend the festival wearing 2 hats, commerce and tourism. He has been invited to serve on a panel titled Beyond Luxury, where he will speak to Cayman's high-end tourism product. Mr. Speaker, I will use this opportunity to meet and strengthen ties with business leaders in Hong Kong, and as such, together with the Financial Services Minister, will host a festival event that will highlight the Cayman Islands and our financial services business. Another important benefit of participating alongside the United Kingdom will be opportunities to reinforce the relationship we have jointly built over the past several years. We anticipate not only engaging in UK-sponsored fringe events with members of the UK government representatives, but we look forward to having them join us at a Cayman Islands cocktail reception where they will hear firsthand the good work we do regarding financial services. And they will have opportunities to meet leaders of Hong Kong-based Cayman companies. In particular, Mr. Speaker, we expect the Secretary of State for International Trade, Liam Fox, to be in attendance at our reception, and prior to the reception, Mr. Fox and I will have a bilateral meeting to discuss matters of interest between the Cayman Islands and the United Kingdom. I am excited about this venture, Mr. Speaker, because the way we live, work, learn, and play in the world is changing exponentially. Innovation has made the world smaller, cities smarter, work automated, education virtual, and put play into our pockets. Now, more than ever, we must look to the future and work with partners who share our creative spirit. Mr. Speaker, we all know the world of work is changing. Technology has created new industries, business models, and behaviors. While we are in Hong Kong, we will also join other attendees in exploring how work and business are being transformed by innovation, radical ideas, and disruptive technology. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we will have the wonderful opportunity to promote these blessed isles on the world stage once again. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let them say without doing nothing.
The Honorable Minister of Financial Services, you have a statement.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. If I could just have the lectern. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, following a year-long dialogue between the Cayman Islands government and the European Union, which included multiple face-to-face and other engagements, on the 5th of December 2017, the EU announced that the Cayman Islands was not included in its list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes. This was a public acknowledgement of our cooperation with the EU and a testament to the strength of our tax regime. Mr. Speaker, in particular, the EU had no concerns with the Cayman Islands regime as it relates to tax transparency, meaning it is satisfied that the Cayman Islands effectively exchanges tax information with other countries. Mr. Speaker, this is yet another clear testament by another international body that the Cayman Islands is not a secrecy jurisdiction or tax haven, contrary to the propaganda pushed by some detractors. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the EU has also acknowledged our commitment to the implementation of the OECD's Base Erosion and Profit Shifting, otherwise known as BEPS, program. BEPS was developed in order to address the concern regarding multinational companies' aggressive tax avoidance strategies. However, Mr. Speaker, while the EU recognized our overall regime as being cooperative, it did express a concern regarding one particular aspect of it. And in our ongoing spirit of global cooperation, Cayman made a commitment to address this concern. Today, Mr. Speaker, in order to keep both the members of this Honourable House and the public informed, I am updating you on our progress in relation to that aspect. But first, Mr. Speaker, as a brief background, I'll summarize information that is already in the public domain. Mr. Speaker, the EU's list identifies countries that it considers to be non-cooperative in working with the EU member states to combat tax fraud, evasion, and avoidance, which erodes the tax bases of the EU member states. When the list was announced on the 5th of December 2017, 17 countries were listed as non-cooperative. Although, Mr. Speaker, there appears to have been movement of countries off and on that list since it was first announced. The EU then deemed another 47 countries as being cooperative, but it also said that these countries could make further enhancements to prevent misuse of their jurisdictions. The EU included the Cayman Islands in this category. The EU screening process entailed consideration of 3 criteria: tax transparency, the implementation of the OECD's base erosion and profit shifting BEPS program, and fair taxation. And as I've indicated earlier, Mr. Speaker, tax transparency refers to the effectiveness of how countries exchange tax information with each other. BEPS was developed in order to address multinational companies' tax avoidance strategies, and fair taxation refers to the lack of preferential tax measures, and it also refers to economic substance. Mr. Speaker, for Cayman, again to reiterate, the EU has no concerns with our tax transparency, meaning it is satisfied that we effectively exchange tax information with other countries. It also has no concerns with the BEPS commitment because we had already given that in 2017. On the point of fair taxation, it is important to stress that Cayman's tax regime does not include preferential tax measures. It does not charge different rates to persons based on factors including whether the person resides in Cayman or not. However, Mr. Speaker, despite this fact, the EU wants more assurance that Cayman's tax regime allows for economic substance. I would underscore at this point, though, Mr. Speaker, and for the purposes of the EU process, the term economic substance is still being defined. So in cooperation, the government is therefore continuing our discussions with the EU on the issue of economic substance. As it relates to the process moving forward, Mr. Speaker, the EU is now in its monitoring phase of the commitments made by countries to eliminate the EU's concerns about allowing the incorporation of companies that are not allowed to operate in our local economy, which is sometimes referred to as ring fencing. The government has committed to revising Cayman's exempted companies regime to allow these entities to operate in the local economy only if local participation requirements are met. To elaborate on what I mentioned earlier, as I said, the Cayman Islands and the EU are also discussing enhanced accounting and regulatory reporting obligations and the definition of economic substance for relevant businesses. And importantly, Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to consult with the financial services industry on any legislative amendments that may be necessary. This is in line with the government's long-standing practice, as we recognize that ongoing dialogue with our key stakeholders is paramount to the current and future success of the Cayman Islands financial services industry. This, Mr. Speaker, is also in keeping with the practice adopted from the very beginning of this latest EU screening process. To this end, the Premier and I, along with the Ministry's technical team, have already met with the representatives of each of the financial services industry associations to update them on the process, the progress, the commitments, and the ongoing discussions with the EU. Because, Mr. Speaker, our collective goal is to ensure that we continue to protect, to promote, and to grow our vibrant and vital financial services industry. Mr. Speaker, I thank the members of this Honourable House and the public for taking the time to understand this global issue and its local implications. I also thank them for their support in contributing to an economy that, through our prudent response to these and other global issues, we will remain strong and viable for all business owners, including our local business owners. Thank you.
Personal explanations.
I have been made aware of the intention of the member from Savannah to make a personal explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to use under personal explanation a slight variation that will encompass a couple of areas which to me I wanted to share with this Honorable House, and probably more importantly with parents and others in the Cayman Islands that may not have access to the internet and other services that provide information. This, Mr. Speaker, is a warning and alert to parents what is happening around us. The concerted efforts by some members of the LGBTQ to influence our young children about their lifestyle. In this instance, Mr. Speaker, I'm referring to Canada. In light of recent occurrences with some of our precious and innocent children suffering abuse. And the second article I would refer to, Mr. Speaker, indicate what has happened in Bermuda, one of our fellow overseas territories, when the populace took a special and definitive stand. Mr. Speaker, we all know that if North America sneezes, Cayman gets the cold. So I think it's best for us to be forewarned. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, the first article emanates out of Vancouver, Canada, and it was in reference, it was titled, "Mommy, I Don't Want to Be a Boy," which was a little girl's reaction to radical sex education program. In Canada, the fight is on over a radical sex education curriculum being pushed in public schools by LGBTQ advocates. Many parents fear their children will become confused and even brainwashed, while supporters claim the program is about allowing students to be their true selves. SOGI, which is the short for it's called Sexual Orientation and Gender Identification, a curriculum that teaches public school students across Canada to celebrate the homosexual lifestyle and that gender is fluid. In other words, Mr. Speaker, your gender is not dependent on what part you were born with, but rather what you feel like in the moment. One female teacher in Canada told her young class, there are people who are boys, there are people who are girls, there are people whose gender might be a little bit of both or might even be neither. Lessons include books about transgender children, such as 10,000 Dresses, and songs like the Rainbow Song, which includes the line, "Gender won't decide the choices we make. Some boys like dressing up, some girls like catching snakes." Mr. Speaker, the SOGI curriculum started in British Columbia in 2016 and is quickly spreading throughout Canada. And I just thought, who decided that this was okay to teach our children, said Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, a leading opponent of SOGI. Tyler Thompson, an author and inspirational speaker, says, among other things, SOGI mandates children as young as kindergarten age be told they can be a different gender than their actual one. And we're seeing the results of that now, because some kids are reacting very emotionally and saying, and they're in fear, will I suddenly struggle with feeling like a different gender inside of my body? Tyler Thompson said. Corey Simpson of Culture Guard, another leading opponent, calls the curriculum nothing short of child abuse. So all those beautiful qualities that make young girls beautiful, girls and women, are being basically vilified. The things that make our boys boys are being taken from them. So equating young men to be strong protectors is something that's now evil, Simpson said. Another blaring example is Drag Queen Story Hour. This is scary, Mr. Speaker. It's happening in Canada and America, where some public schools and libraries invite drag queens, some dressed like horned demons, to read to young children. I understand we might have had a sample of that here some time ago, when they had a thing down at one of the hotels. It's a social deconstructionist agenda. They're using, Mr. Speaker, little 5-year-olds to accomplish this and then raise them up to be radicalized social justice warriors, and parents are waking up and saying no. What about parental rights? When asked about parents' rights, Ogier says, actually in Canada, the parents' rights are limited and children's rights are put ahead, so the child has the right to be protected from the parents when the parents behave badly. I'll skip down to save time, Mr. Speaker. It's very scary. This is very scary stuff, said Pastor Kevin Kavanaugh of Cedar Grove Church in Surrey. Longtime Vancouver area pastor Kevin Kavanaugh says this is far more serious than most Canadian Christians realize. Our problem is not the teachers, the educators, the administrators. This is a battle in the heavenlies, and Satan is trying to destroy people's souls, he said. Kavanaugh says Satan is going after their most vulnerable, the children. And this little girl, as I started out earlier, came home in tears because the teacher had told her that she was playing with some toys in the class that were deemed to be masculine in nature, that she was likely a boy in a girl's body. Kavanaugh said, she came home in tears and said, Mommy, Mommy, I don't want to be a boy. The mother went to the school the very next day, and instead of having any tolerance or support or understanding, she was actually called names. She was told she was a homophobe, a bigot, he said. With that in mind, Tyler Thompson Simpson and Pastor Kavanaugh are spreading their message across social media and in town hall meetings. But the pro-gay backlash has been fierce. And that hatred and the anger and the bullying came against us. Even though we said we love you, we don't take from you the opportunity and the freedom to live as you choose. We love you, but we do not agree with you. But the hatred that came back, I was once again called a homophobe, a Hitler. Tyler Thompson said, we don't have the religious freedom that we thought, and now our children are being indoctrinated with something that we do not believe as Christians. Mr. Speaker, that's what's happening across in the great North America, including Canada and certain parts of Texas. The other article that came to my attention and I shared with some of my colleagues, and this was in Citizens Go in earlier part of last month. It says, thank you, Bermuda, for reaffirming natural marriage. Bermuda just became the first country in the world to abolish same-sex marriage 1 year after it was legalized. The government of Bermuda has affirmed that natural marriage is the union of one man and one woman. Bermuda government John Rankin signed a bill into law reversing an earlier Supreme Court ruling that legalized same-sex marriage. That court decision had overruled a referendum in which Bermudian voters rejected same-sex marriage by a wide margin. The government noted in a bill signing statement that the majority of Bermudians do not support same-sex marriage. Bermuda's recent repeal of same-sex marriage is an example to the world that marriage revisionism is not inevitable, and that the institution of natural marriage can still be protected. But now Bermuda, as similar to what I talked about in Canada, is under fire from the LGBT activists and an international cable trying to push their views onto the people of Bermuda. The global community must rally to show Bermuda that we support their decision to define marriage as the union of one man and one woman. I took the opportunity to, and I know some other colleagues of mine, to support the Bermudan government on this effort. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And after hearing all the good stuff by the Premier and the Minister of Financial Services, etc., what we're doing. Let's make sure that we don't lose things down the wash for the wrong reason and from the wrong people.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches.
None.
Raising a matter of privileges.
None.
Government business. Bills, third readings. The Youth Justice Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honorable Minister of... The Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Youth Justice Amendment Bill 2018 be given a third reading and pass.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Youth Justice Amendment Bill 2018 be given a third reading and passed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The Youth Justice Amendment Bill 2018 has been read a third time and is passed.
The Trade and Business Licensing Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that a bill shortly entitled the Trade and Business Licensing Amendment Bill 2018 be given a third reading and passed.
Question is that a bill shortly entitled the Trade and Business Licensing Amendment Bill 2018 be given a third reading and passed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The Trade and Business Licensing Amendment Bill 2018 has been read a third time and is passed.
Government motion number 6 of 2017-18, issuance of a deed of indemnity to the members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board, to be moved by the Honorable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
The Honorable Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the government motion number 6, 2018, pursuant to the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision, which reads as follows. Issuance of a deed of indemnity to the members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. Whereas the government of the Cayman Islands is desirous of issuing a deed of indemnity to the members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board, as per the attached deed of indemnity, and whereas Section 8 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision provides that, as a general rule, no guarantee may be given by or on behalf of the government unless it has been authorized by a resolution of the Legislative Assembly, be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly hereby authorizes the issuance to members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board a deed of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board.
The question is that be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly hereby authorizes the issuance to members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board of a deed of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board. Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to briefly speak to the motion that seeks to authorize the issuance of the deed of indemnity to the members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board. Mr. Speaker, as this Honourable House may be aware, the Public Authorities Law 2017 was passed by the last administration and came into force on the 1st of June 2017. The law's purpose is to provide uniform regulation of the management and governance of public authorities. However, Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority has since raised concerns that the immunity provisions of the Public Authorities Law are inconsistent with the relevant provisions of the Monetary Authority Law 2016 revision. Mr. Speaker, SEMA's position is that clarity should be achieved by amending the relevant provisions of the Public Authorities Law. And the Deputy Governor and the Attorney General are already aware of the concerns expressed and are looking into the issues as raised by SEMA with the intention of bringing appropriate amending legislation to address those concerns expressed. In addition, Mr. Speaker, several of the SEMA board members have expressed their reluctance to continue to serve in their present roles unless the Public Authorities Law is amended or unless they have been provided such deed of indemnity in the interim. Mr. Speaker, the government motion to issue a deed of indemnity for the members of the SEMA board aims to ensure that SEMA retains and attracts top-level expertise for its representation and composition of the board, which in turn maintains confidence in the robustness of our regulatory framework. And so, Mr. Speaker, as required by Section 8 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision, a resolution must be obtained from the Legislative Assembly to grant approval for the deed of indemnity. The deed of indemnity and the government motion, Mr. Speaker, was drafted by the Ministry in consultation with the SEMA board and the legal department, which approved the document shown as Appendix A and circulated by members of or staff of this Legislative Assembly. In closing, I ask for the support of this Honourable House to approve the issuance to members of the Board of Directors of SEMA a deed of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Board of Directors of SEMA.
Any other member wish to speak? The member from Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just wait for the Sarge to bring the lectern. Oh yeah, I got all of them tagged up, yeah.
Before you begin, call on the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
Question is that Standing Orders 10-2 be suspended in order for business to continue. All those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The House continues. Honourable member from Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I first saw this deed, it kind of jumped out in the sense of when you look at the language in the deed, it kind of raised a little bit of concern, and I just wanted to put it out there for the record at least that this Honourable House actually look at 6 issues that kind of jump out with me when I saw this deed. Firstly, when I consider the function of SEMA, I think that we may probably be sending a message. I mean, considering that SEMA is a regulatory body that regulate other directors, and for us issuing a kind of blank check to directors that regulate other directors, I think that is definitely something. The second thing that jumped out at me was when I looked at both the Monetary Authority Law and also the Public Authority Law. Based on existing legislation, it appears that the directors were covered. And one of the other things I was worried about when I noticed that the deed itself had one director missing, I was wondering then what protection is there then for the managing director, because I know that person is excluded from the deed itself, and also the staff, because I think for some strange reason they may also be exposed to some extent. And then the issue is, Mr. Speaker, is that if it is a case now where the the immunities that we put under the existing legislation, if it is not working for the SEMA directors, then the question is it also then not working for other directors on other boards? Which then naturally asks, do we now expect the NRA board, the HSA board, and all these other government boards that actually, if they be open to the same risk again? So then we have a potential floodgate issue coming down. And then pretty much what I noticed, and this was just some comparison, is that the deed that we were issuing was slightly different from the standard deeds that were actually issued in the past, and also one that was scheduled to come. And at the same time, I wanted to make sure that we weren't being seen to do anything preferential in terms of for one board versus another board and the whole 9 yards. So those are the kind of things that kind of jumped out at me first, Mr. Speaker, when I looked at it. And at a minimum, I kind of more had these concerns. So what I wanted to look at, and I started, looking itself in terms of the role of SEMA itself. The thing is, Mr. Speaker, SEMA regulates our financial industry. And the directors of the entities that SEMA regulate are expected to perform a certain way, expected to, have due care, act in good faith, and the whole 9 yards. And if they fail to do so, they can actually be prosecuted. So then the question is then, what message would we be sending to our own financial industry if what it is that we expect of our directors, we're holding the directors of SEMA, pretty much giving them a kind of blank check? I want to look at SEMA website, Mr. Speaker, and I look under their principal functions. I know this, I won't read all of them out, but I just want to bring 4 of them to this honorable House. It says, have a regard to general accepted principles of good corporate governance. It also says, endeavor to promote and enhance market confidence, consumer protection, and the reputation of the islands as a financial center. Recognize the principle that a burden or restriction which is imposed on a person or on the carrying on of an activity should be proportionate to the benefits considered in general terms which are expected to result from the imposition of that burden or restriction, and also recognize the need for transparency and fairness on the part of the authority. I don't know if you want a copy of this, that's fine. So, Mr. Speaker, when I looked at that and I then consider the actual Monetary Authority Law 2016 revision, and just looking at section 11 of that law that deals with the board of directors, it says, and I just want to read the law here. There shall be a board of directors of the authority which, subject to this law, shall be responsible for the governance, policy, and performance of the authority and the general conduct of its affairs and businesses. The board shall consist of a managing director as an ex officio director, and not more than 9 other members, not more than 9 other directors, including the chairman of the board and the deputy chairman of the board, appointed in accordance with sections 12 and 13, each of whom shall be fit and proper person and shall have demonstrated to the satisfaction of cabinet substantial knowledge and experience relevant to at least some of the functions of the authority. So, Mr. Speaker, fit and proper, I wasn't too sure what that was. So I had to go on SEMA's website again to see exactly what it is that fit and proper entails. And again, I must say that the SEMA team and whatever the website, I must say it is actually quite informative and everything else. And I just wanted to read to this honorable House some of the requirements that SEMA requires of the directors within the financial services industry. I won't go through all of them, Mr. Speaker, but just some that kind of jumped out, which I just want to make this honorable House aware of. In terms of fit and proper, and they have certain obligations of the licensee In section 5.1, it says, when a licensee seeks to appoint a person to perform a controlled function, the burden is on the licensee sponsoring the application to satisfy the authority that the person is fit and proper to perform the function for which the person is engaged. 5.2 goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, it is expected that the assessment conducted by the licensee will take place during the recruitment stage and on an ongoing basis, and that the licensee make every effort to verify qualifications, experience, references, and membership of professional bodies. It is also expected that the licensee will conduct probity checks on criminal history, sanctions, legal proceedings, and other similar matters. The licensee should be able to satisfy the authority that the person proposed to act in a controlled function possesses sufficient competence and capability for the particular function. Section 6.19 also says, Mr. Speaker, whether the person has been in a controlled function of a business that has gone into insolvency, liquidation, or administration, while the person has been connected with that organization or within 1 year of such a connection. And the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, as you go through more and more of these requirements and you see what is expected of a director for an entity licensed by SEMA, and it is an exhaustive list which I won't go through. The question is, do we really and truly want to indemnify the regulators of an entity that is also regulating other directors? The message that it is sending, Mr. Speaker, I think is one that we need to be very, very careful of. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to say for the record, and I know both yourself and the Premier would know this firsthand, there are some things in this house that should be above politics. And SEMA and our financial industry is one of them. And I know, Mr. Speaker, you of all people would know that when we were on the road show around 9 years ago, and when we saw the amount of information that was gathered on the Cayman Islands based on utterances that were made locally, we know that our international competitors are listening and they are watching. And I want to say, I mean, having worked for a global financial organization, nothing makes me more proud than when I go overseas and I will interact with some individuals and they will ask me if I know such and such a person at SEMA. I can say to you, Mr. Speaker, as a person who was previously regulated by SEMA, is that we do have a world-class regulatory body in place. And as such, we inside this honorable house need to make sure that we don't say or do anything to give the public or anyone any impression as if though there are weaknesses within our own regulatory function. You know, so the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, as we look at what it is that we expect of those directors, I don't think it is right that we should then set out our own directors such broad indemnity in terms of what it is that really jumped out. And the thing about it, Mr. Speaker, that really caught my eye on this one, and it was just a matter of preparing for the meeting, and as you're going through and you're reading ahead and you're looking at the stuff, it goes to section 2.1 of the deed itself. And when you compare it to the standard clause that we have out there, there is a difference. And I'm going to actually just read them slightly, Mr. Speaker, so you can understand exactly where I'm coming from. In the deed for the Monetary Authority, section 2.1, it says, subject to clauses 2.9 and 3.3 of this deed, the Cabinet shall, to the fullest extent permitted by law and without prejudice to any other indemnity to which an indemnified person may otherwise be entitled, indemnify and hold the identified person harmless on demand in respect to all claims and losses arising out of or in connection with actual or purported exercise of or failure to exercise any of the indemnified person's powers, duties, and responsibility as a member of the board from 1st of June 2017 onward, provided that the indemnified person acted in good faith. It ends there. That's where it stops. In other indemnities, Mr. Speaker, that was issued in the past, it carries on to also say, and just provided that the indemnified person acted in good faith and in a manner reasonably believed by the indemnified person to be in or not opposed to the best interests of the board. I notice there's also, again, in clause 2.3, differences again between this deed and other deeds that were there. And so I'm a bit curious as to why that part would have been taken out. And listening to the Honorable Minister when she was explaining the genesis of how we came up with this deed, and recognizing the talent that is on the SEMA board, I wanted to know what was the driving force why this standard part of the deed was changed and that part was actually taken out. Now, I don't want it to suggest that there's something untoward other than the fact that maybe SEMA have better legal minds, which would confirm that we have good people on the board to have actually have known something. I just want to put that out there, but that is really what, as you're looking back and forth, you realize that there's slightly a little bit difference in the language. So, and that's one of the things I wanted to find out, Mr. Speaker, as to why those parts were taken out of the SEMA deed. Because the question is, Mr. Speaker, if this is a standard deed and we have issued it in the past, does it then mean that the people who those previous deeds were issued to, are they now more exposed, or is there something different why their deed are different from the deed from SEMA when they're supposed to be looking to achieve the same role? So that is the kind of where I was trying to understand why those deeds were different. You know, and the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, is that if I'm sitting on a board, a government board right now, and I'm hearing that the directors of SEMA are now given an indemnity because they're worried about getting sued, and recognizing that even, not want to speak at that, even the liquor board license looking exactly for the same thing too. The question is then, how much more of these deed of indemnity should we be expecting at the LA? Because it means then that if the law is inadequate, and this is a house that makes laws, we fix laws. What we don't do, Mr. Speaker, is issue blank checks. And when I look, Mr. Speaker, at some of the clauses within the deed, just to kind of put it out there for members to fully understand, it says the indemnity, just want to read a couple of them, Mr. Speaker. Each indemnified person shall, after consultation with Cabinet, have the right in their sole discretion to appoint and be legally represented by counsel or a law firm of his or her choice. That is a very expensive regard right there. And we look also in section 2.6, Mr. Speaker, it says, the indemnity contained in clause 2.1 shall extend to oblige the Cabinet within 28 business days of any written demand, first to advance to the indemnified person the full amount of all costs or expenses, not limited to legal costs, expenses, and/or disbursement, anticipated by the indemnified person to be incurred by such indemnified person in defense of or otherwise in connection with any claim commenced against him or in connection with the board, or any losses in any jurisdiction indemnified pursuant to this deed, and secondly, to provide all such further advances as are necessary to cover any such further claims or losses within 28 business days, and any further written demand being made to the indemnified person or the board and copy to Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, it is very broad and recognizing the industry that SEMA is in, if somebody's chances are looking to sue SEMA, I guarantee, Mr. Speaker, they're going to have some very deep pockets. And if we're going to go and buy or get legal counsel, and worse, if it's 2, 3, 4 directors being sued in one time, and each of them going out to get their own lawyer from whichever QC or whichever firm that they need around the world, I mean, the cost can become quite staggering, Mr. Speaker. And we're talking about just one board and even maybe just one incident. And the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, when you also look at what it is that even if the person was to plead no contest or anything, that doesn't mean we still would be responsible. No. The thing about it, Mr. Speaker, is this really the message that we want to be sending in terms of, in this day and age, that rather than fix the law, because if the issues with the law, we fix laws. But what we don't do, Mr. Speaker, and I strongly suggest or not encourage that we do, is start issuing blank checks. Because I know we have given it before in the past, the Cayman Airways and also Cynical, but those are government entities. They're companies. I think they're under the company's laws and slightly a bit different. I'm even sympathetic to even a government department, Mr. Speaker, for the simple fact I can tell you as a former member of the Business Staff and Plan Board, we have had discussions in terms of our own exposure about possibly being sued, and especially when you turn on permits for law firms and so forth, and recognizing that they have 3, 4 floor lawyers and you basically have none, that someone can just tie you up for the fun of it. I mean, these are questions that naturally board people ask. The member from Newlands and myself, we served on the HSA board during the first UDP government, Mr. Speaker, and even there I can tell you, we have had those concerns, even though it was actually there within the law that we had some protection. So the question is, Mr. Speaker, to this honorable House is for us to consider, if the law is inadequate, do we A, work on fixing the law, or do we B, start looking to just start issuing deed of indemnities to directors and government boards? Because we have another one coming that was also been proposed. And the question is, where do we stop? Because we're now opening up the contingent liabilities of this country if someone was indeed to start suing the country. You know what I mean? So the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, I do accept where the directors are coming from SEMA, because at the same time, they're also personally exposed. And I really can't blame anybody to not want to protect themselves on any board. And it's just the reality of the world we're living in. So what I would like to know, first of all, is going by what the Honorable Minister said, that there were issues within the public authorities law that we're looking to fix. The question is, when we fix those issues, are we going to cancel these deeds? If that is the case, then, and this is only a temporary fix, I can live with that. But if it's a situation now where we may not get around to it, and other board members start freaking out and decided, you know what, maybe SEMA is onto something, we need to make sure we're not exposed, so you know what, let us go and ask Cabinet for this deed too. And when you consider the amount of government boards that we have and the amount of directors that we have sitting on these boards, Mr. Speaker, the question is, do we really want to open this door and start going down this road? The other thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, is as I think about it, and I do recognize and understand where the government is coming from, and I am really starting to get a chance to speak to the Honorable Minister before this to find out in advance if it would have been temporary, because then it would have, I guess, probably saved me from at least raising these concerns. But at a minimum, I think it's important for us to recognize that we need to fix the law and we need to make it a priority, because we can't, in good conscience, ask people to serve the country, sit on the boards, and know that we have a law that is flawed and leave them unprotected. So with that said, Mr. Speaker, don't worry, I know the paper may have frightened some of you guys, but when I do read, I like to get a good understanding of things. I just want to say in closing, Mr. Speaker, that I want to thank the members of the board of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. I think they've done a fantastic job. And some of them have been on the board for quite some time. And I think it's something that we should always recognize, because public service is still a noble calling, and we should always put it out there. But at the same time, we just need to make sure that we're not leaving other directors unprotected. So with that said, I will end my contribution there, but at least I just wanted to put it out there to this honorable house that we don't want to leave anybody on any board unprotected. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, just very briefly, by way of a couple of observations. The deed of indemnity that was referred to by the honorable member. It is true that the language in the deed is somewhat generous, if I might put it that way. But like any other deed of indemnity, these are matters of discussions between the parties. The parties always tend to agree on the language that they consider adequate in any deed. So there's really no standard language or particular incantation. It is all a matter of discussion and agreement between parties as to what language in a deed would give them comfort. And so there are different variations, but the basic intent is the same, which is to provide your directors with the necessary comfort from any sort of exposure that they might have arising out of their directorship. I think there are other deeds that were issued, some to Cayman Airways and Cineco and so on. But the purpose is the same. The language, one of the provisions referred to by the honorable member, for example, section 2.4, paragraph 2.4, each indemnified person shall, after consultation with the cabinet, have the right to in their sole discretion to appoint and be legally represented by counsel or a law firm of his or her choice. Whilst the language there might seem a bit wide to the member, the fact is that it requires, before counsel is selected by the director, it requires consultation with cabinet. And the expectation there is that if those discussions are held, or when those discussions are held, certainly cabinet has the ability to agree the terms of the retainer and the extent of the legal expenses that might be incurred, and so be able to contain it. I mean, it's not a blank check, certainly not a blank check, and so I certainly don't read it that way. I think it provides cabinet with the opportunity to have input in the attorney or the firm that is selected to represent the director. The 2.6, if you look at, I think it is Cayman Airways, I think it might say 7 days in terms of the period within which the cabinet is obliged to advance the fund, the indemnified person with the fund. When we took a look at this, and we agreed that this period ought to be extended. And so that's how we arrive at at 28 days. It was by way of agreement with the parties that we would have, this period extended to 28 days. So, Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is that, like any other deed of indemnity, this one was arrived at after discussions on both sides, and I don't think it provides sort of create any sort of greater exposure to government than any of the others that we have entered into. The question about whether or not the deed was necessary is another issue. But the honorable member gave the explanation for that. The Public Authorities Law was enacted by government to create consistency in governance of public authorities. I'm sorry. Lose my voice. Sorry. Mr. Speaker, there are two provisions in there, 23 and 54, which deals with immunity for persons in public authorities, in these public authorities, or statutory authorities. The language in the Public Authorities Law is not unique to SEMA. It affects off-regs and other authorities. SEMA raised some concerns about the scope of the language in the Public Authorities Law, in particular sections 23 and 54. And they took the view that it is not wide enough to provide the directors and the staff with the necessary comfort that they would require to carry out their function. And I said comfort in terms of exposure and liability. We took a look at the language, and even though we were of the view, we meaning the chambers, even though we were of the view that the language in section 23, section 23, 2, and 54 would provide that sort of a comfort, well, was intended to provide that sort of comfort. There was an argument to be made that it could have been more fulsome. The language itself could have been more fulsome. And so, Mr. Speaker, if you look at section 20, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, because I wasn't, forgive me, I wasn't really prepared to speak on this motion, so I'm not here prepared. I didn't come prepared. Anyway, but if you look at the language in 23.2, the law. I'm sorry.
It's on page 16 of the law.
I have a copy. Yeah.
Is this a good time to take a 15-minute break?
I would like to get myself a copy of the law, Mr. Speaker.
So,
of the Public Authorities Law, which is what I don't have.
The House will suspend for 15 minutes, please.